Rehabilitating Prison. St. John the Philosopher here. Among the many American institutions in need of innovation and reform, prisons don't come up very often. While it can be difficult to sympathize with lawbreakers, it's important to remember that prisons are supposed to serve an important function for society, when they work as they are intended anyway. Our current system could use a tune-up, so let's take a look and see what we find behind those prison bars. Before we really get into the topic of prison reform, we should probably deal with the question, why do we even have prisons at all? At first blush, it could seem a bit weird that a government and society like ours, based largely on the idea of protecting natural rights, would have an institution that deprives those rights from a specific set of people. Well, in a couple of earlier videos, we talked about the natural rights of life, liberty, and property, and how the right to self-defense is the capstone of the others. Generally speaking, society regulates standards of behavior, attempting to balance respect for natural rights and the practical considerations of large numbers of individuals living together. Government, at least the representative kind, in turn codifies those standards and enforces them, wielding the power lent to them by the governed. One way of looking at it is that the people outsource to a degree their right to self-defense by empowering the government to protect them. In this way, the people and the government are bound together by a social compact wherein the citizens agree to obey the laws the government produces out of their collective social will, while the government protects the law-abiding. In the event someone breaks that compact by disobeying the law, they forfeit a measure of their rights. This would be no different than what we already understand about the right to self-defense. If someone attempts to violate your rights to property, let's say, it's only just that you can violate their personal space. Similarly, the government has borrowed the power of the people to dole out punishment for wrongdoing. That's where things like prisons come in. Whether you call them penitentiaries, from the same root as the word penance, which means repentance, or corrections facilities, whose meaning is a bit more obvious, prisons are intended to serve two purposes: punishment and rehabilitation. The former is pretty obvious. Prison ain't fun. The latter has been a little tricky to accomplish. In bygone eras, it was assumed that the sheer weight of the punishment was sufficient to compel individuals to adjust their future behavior. There are all sorts of reasons why things are different in today's age, but suffice to say that that kind of thinking doesn't really work anymore. Over time, there have been several changes in implementation of this philosophy to varying degrees of effectiveness. The whipping post and the stocks have been abandoned.
I'm free! I'm free!
Dang it! We've eliminated chain gangs and added yard time and TVs. Better yet, there are libraries and educational opportunities in prisons now. Now, you'd think we were moving in the right direction, but for every few steps forward, there seems to be an equal number of steps back. While we make all sorts of jokes in our media about prison rape, it's no laughing matter for the estimated 70,000 victims per year, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And sure, the tortures that used to be administered by authorities as the punishment portion of prison life are gone, but they've only been replaced by the cruelty and violence of the prisoners themselves. By most reports, life on the inside plays out like some post-apocalyptic society ruled by the worst of the worst. Out of this crucible of human deprivation, not many come out clean enough to truly reintegrate with civilization. Again, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, over 44% of inmates released from federal prisons are rearrested within 5 years. For state prisons, that number rises to over 76%. Whether anecdotal or statistical, the evidence is clear. Our prison system is not working the way we want it to. So in the spirit of President Trump's most recent push towards reforming prisons, I'd like to offer my own suggestions, leveraging one of the most powerful engines of human behavior: incentive.
I got you $1. Oh, you almost had it. You gotta be quicker than that.
I'll probably do a deep dive on the consideration of incentive when crafting policy sometime in the future, but for now, just suffice to say that the most effective policies seek to make bad behaviors difficult and costly, and good behaviors easier and cheaper. With that in mind, here are 3 changes I think can help fix prisons. 1. Bring back chain gangs. Okay, not literal chain gangs, but we do need to bring physical labor back as part of every inmate's day. There are men and women that break their backs every day contributing to the pot of tax money spent on keeping prisons running. So I don't think it's at all cruel or unusual to require labor from inmates to pay at least part of their way through the system, the same way as you and I work to put food on our own tables. For some, this may actually be the first time they use their strength for something productive, and depending on the type of work we're talking about, it can serve as an analog to traditional entrance into the workforce, providing valuable experience that can be used on the outside. More than that, after a hard day's work, maybe some remedial classes and mandatory psychological and/or drug counseling, inmates should be too physically, mentally, and emotionally drained to get into much trouble during what little free time would be left in the day. There could even be performance-based reward system established for inmates to gain extra privileges or shorten sentences through effort and merit, providing even more incentive to progress through the program. 2. Tie prison administration contracts to inmate success. Those who believe that there is a conspiratorial prison industrial complex do have a very legitimate complaint in that for private companies that administer prisons, contracts are largely based on the number of beds in use. Now, it must be said too, however, that state or federally run prisons have their funding tied to their reported expenses, which is, you guessed it, tied to inmate population. In other words, from an administration standpoint, prisons are oriented simply to house inmates and not to rehabilitate them. That's where incentives come in. If the purse strings are tied to measurable positive outcomes for inmates like recidivism rates, education, job skill improvement, and post-release employment, you can bet that systems would arise to take full advantage. Yes, private companies may end up making big bucks running prisons, but if they're making sure that the inmates that pass through their doors never come back and become productive members of society, that's a win for everybody. 3. Provide employers an insurance policy to hire former inmates. This is a back-end change that I think is necessary to tie this all together. It's no secret that felons have a much harder time finding work than their peers. Regardless of whatever diplomas, certifications, or even college degrees that an inmate may acquire on the inside, they're going to inevitably encounter the question on just about every application form: have you ever been convicted of a crime?
3 years at San Quentin, huh?
You found out.
Baskin-Robbins always finds out.
Look, I'm sorry, all right, but no one would hire me.
Breaking and entering, grand larceny.
Look, I'm sorry.
Respect. I couldn't be happier about it.
Really?
Yeah, you really stuck it to those billionaire SOBs. And the more I read about what you did and stuff, I'm like, wow, I know this guy.
Well, I'm very happy in this job, and I really just appreciate the opportunity to help
you're
support
fired, of course. I mean, can't really keep you on.
Wait, what?
Sure, there are some places where it isn't really a deal breaker, but the stigma in the workplace is a real impediment to the type of life change we all want for those that have paid their debt to society. Certainly, you can't blame employers for wanting to be careful. Their assets and the safety of their employees must be considered. So, to take some pressure off the job market, it would be in the interest of all involved if prison administrators, whether private or governmental, gave employers insurance policies that provide monetary coverage for any harm that might befall a business that's hired a former inmate. This not only lubricates the path for ex-cons to become productive members of society, but it further incentivizes the prison system itself to diligently work to prepare inmates for that reintegration, or otherwise pay the price. Prisons serve the dual purpose of removing criminals from societal influence and sending them back out ready to re-engage the world in the proper way. Based on our dramatically falling crime rates over the past decades, we've done a fantastic job at the former, but the latter has much to be desired. I'm no expert on criminal justice or the penal system, and I haven't worked all the details for the 3 policy changes I'm suggesting, but I do think that whatever we do, it must be something transformational. Whether prisons are run by the government or private companies, it makes no difference if neither entity is held to account for real-world results. So tell me what you think of this video. Let me know what you think about my ideas to reform prisons. Do you have any innovative ideas? Discuss in the comments. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more videos on religion, culture, and politics. That's all for today. This is St. John the Philosopher. Goodbye, God bless, and I'll see you in another video.